Thank you very much. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, not of me, which was very kind, but of the subject, of the importance of understanding the context and of the aggressiveness of Canada as part of a US-led alliance. Just for context, I was on the economic advisory team of President Gorbachev 34 years ago. I was an advisor to President Yeltsin 31 years ago. I was an advisor to Ukraine's President Kuchma 30 years ago. I was an advisor to President Yushchenko about 27 years ago. I know this story from the beginning. This is a story about NATO expansion. And this is a story that you will not read in the mainstream media. This is a story that the US government works overtime to hide and to dissemble. And this is most unfortunate. Most governments don't tell the truth about anything anymore, but I wait for the United States to tell the truth about anything anymore, because I do not believe anything that comes out of Washington these days about this war and much else, unfortunately. Sad to say, this is a war that could readily have been avoided at so many times, because first the Soviet Union and then leaders of Russia said over and over again, do not expand NATO to Ukraine. Is this such a hard concept to grasp? I think we should just contemplate if Mexico and China make a military alliance, the United States is not going to say, and Prime Minister Trudeau is not going to say, well, that's their choice. It's an open door. They can do what they want. That's pretense or arrogance. I don't know which for sure. But the United States has said, we don't care what Russia says about what we do. And it is formal NATO policy, stated repeatedly. Our decisions of where we go cannot be influenced by third countries, period. So NATO assumes that it can move to anybody's border without complaint or response. If you want to know why this war occurred, that's it. That's the one sentence explanation. The rest is details. The US believes it runs the world. It's the sole superpower. And it can do what it wants. And because of American values, we can do whatever we want. Whether it's subversive operations, overthrowing governments, launching wars on false pretenses, bombing Belgrade, bombing Libya, doesn't matter. But don't expect to get the straight story, because you won't. Biden came into office and Putin put forward a draft security agreement in December 2021 that was to be an agreement between NATO and Russia on security arrangements, calling for, at the center, stopping the enlargement. I spoke to White House officials, a senior White House official at the end of 2021. I said, avoid the war, for heaven's sake, stop the NATO enlargement. Do you get it? This has been the issue all along. And I was told, never, we will never negotiate over that issue. NATO has a, quote, open door, just like I'm sure we'd say with Mexico if it allies with China. I can't say the real word that applies to this because it's not in polite company, but this is not grown-up behavior. This is provocation of war. So in the middle of January 2022, the US formally rejected any discussion about NATO enlargement. And if you read the minutes of Russia's National Security Council meeting on the eve of the invasion, and the meeting took place, I believe it was the 21st of February, you can see all the statements. They're all about NATO. Putin opens, he says, we tried to stop NATO enlargement, but they weren't serious, and the United States is without any credibility whatsoever. And then Lavrov speaks next, and he describes the negotiating process and how it failed, and that the NATO countries were unwilling to discuss the disposition of NATO. Okay, that's the war. The war broke out. Within a month, Zelensky said, you know, maybe we could be neutral. And negotiations started in Ankara with Turkish mediation. And I spoke to the Turkish mediators. I spoke to people who were deeply involved in this. There was rapid progress made on the basis of Ukrainian neutrality. Then, one day, the Ukrainians showed up and said, no, we're taking a pause from the negotiations. The best estimate given to us by former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett in a very interesting long interview that he gave online a couple of months ago said, yeah, the US stopped it. He said, I didn't agree with them, but they thought that they needed to be tough towards China, that it would be a sign of weakness to go along with this. Honest to God. Honestly, it's worse than 5-year-olds. And so the war continued, the negotiations ended. We've had another year. They don't care about the lives lost in Washington. They don't care. Even Romney wrote an article saying this war is great. Russia is losing, Russia's being bled, and not one American life is being lost. He actually had the stupidity to write that, or the evil to write that. Okay, that's the story. If we want this war to end, we got to negotiate, and it's got to be based on no NATO enlargement. There is no other way this war will end. Why? Because if Ukraine is victorious on the battlefield, Russia will use nuclear weapons. And if Ukraine fails on the battlefield, well, the whole thing's moot. And the third option is the war goes on forever, which is American-style wars. Yeah, sure, we can just fight forever. If we want peace, we actually have to tell the truth, which is that there are limits to NATO enlargement. And I'm sorry to say, Canada is absolutely an accomplice to this. And what's a shame for me is I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. Canada was due south for me, so you were my southern neighbor in Windsor. I always regarded Canada as the sane part of the continent because I knew that the United States was the crazy part of the continent. But I'm not seeing in Canadian leadership now any honesty about this at all. I'm sorry to tell you. And I've had some interactions that I don't like because this is all gung-ho militarism. And as Bianca said at the opening, the foreign minister, it was the foreign minister, right, Bianca, who said, this is not the time to talk about peace. This is the time for war. We don't have diplomats anymore, ladies and gentlemen. We just have diplomats trying to prove that they're warmongers. We don't have any diplomats because life doesn't matter. It's Ukrainians there. And the Ukrainians, well, they are suffering beyond belief. Their government has gambled everything of their country on the US backing. It's a terrible gamble. I tried to tell them, ask the Vietnamese, ask the Nicaraguans, ask Afghanistan, ask Libya, ask the Syrians. Is it great to gamble with the US as your backer? Not so good. Thank you very much.
We are now going to head into the Q&A. We have a little bit of time, and we do have a few journalists who have shown up and would like to ask a question. We're going to see if we can figure out how this works. Rachel, if you could help me just promote Michael to a panelist, Michael Klassen from Bridge City News, or unmute him. Rachel, are you able to do that?
Yes, Michael, you should now be unmuted. Please speak.
Hi, thank you very much. It's been delightful to hear this conversation. I have two kind of forward-thinking questions. The first one is, what do you see as the ramifications of the generational loss of life in Ukraine?
Is this question directed towards Ivan or Jeffrey or both?
Professor Sachs. If I got that right.
Yes. Well, just to briefly, of course, this is devastating for Ukraine because millions of people are refugees. Young people have left. The economy is destroyed. The cities and infrastructure are being destroyed. It's a catastrophe. And when this war started, I said to the U.S. and I wrote in public that NATO, and led by the US, will make Ukraine the next Afghanistan. And by that, I meant a country left in ruins by prolonged war. And that's the path that we're on right now. Of course, to save Ukraine, we need to stop the war through negotiations, not by some military victory, this illusory victory over a country with 1,600 deployed nuclear weapons. It doesn't even make sense what our governments say. They have no plan, they have no strategy, they're politicians. They're playing until the next news cycle. They have no strategy.
Thank you.
Thank you. And is that it? Did you have a follow-up?
Well, yes, one other one, and I think it's related. Coming from a Christian perspective, the Bible says that every seed produces after its own kind. Do you see this and what's been happening in financial markets as the sun setting on the American empire?
Well, I think if we're just speaking technically about it, we are at the end of the American-led world by fact, not even by these disastrous blunders, but simply by the fact that other countries, and of course most notably China, but not China alone, has very talented, well-educated, skilled people with a strong infrastructure and strong technology. So a country, the US, with 4.1% of the world population, should never presume to run the world or to write the rules. We are intrinsically in a multipolar world. But the whole idea of neoconservatism in the United States, and that's the government we have right now, and it's bipartisan, it's Democrats and Republicans, is that the US is the unique unipolar country, and it must resist any potential competitors, most importantly China, and Russia is viewed as a more minor regional threat. It's mind-boggling, but that is the literal view of Victoria Nuland. It is the view of her husband, Robert Kagan, who writes these books that are shocking in their naivete, like The Jungle Grows Back, the whole theme of which is the world's a jungle, the US is a garden, and it's the job of the United States to stop the jungle. It's gross. That's actually, I'm telling you, that is the guiding principles. And Canada, please think clearly. Come on. You guys are better than that. Really. So please act better than that. Don't just follow the US line into these wars of trying to defend hegemonic power. The next one will be over Taiwan. That could end all of it. Even this one can end all of it. Today we took what seems to be another horrible step of escalation. If it's true, who knows whether it's true or not true, but I was just watching the video that the Russian government has posted of Ukrainian drones intercepted over the Kremlin. If this is right, are we kidding? And I wrote to leading journalists because they said, the Financial Times wrote this afternoon, I can't even make sense of it. It said, hold on, let me see if I can find it, because it's so indicative of the crazy mindset. Oh my God. Yeah, well, they changed it from when I read it this morning. Now it says, if confirmed, the apparent attempt on Putin's life and the acknowledgement from the Kremlin would mark an extraordinary admission of Russian vulnerability. Instead of saying, oh my God, are we really going to have World War III? It was taken all day by the Financial Times all afternoon as, well, look at this. What is, this is Russian vulnerability. There are no grownups right now in our governments or in the media that parrot our governments. Honestly, I'm 68. I've been through the Vietnam War, through the Gulf Wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Serbia, Syria, countless CIA overthrows of governments. I've never seen anything like we're seeing right now. And it may be because of this desperation of the US of somehow seeing its hegemonic rule questioned, or it may be that they've lost their minds out of decades of arrogance. I don't know what it is.
Thank you. Thank you for that commentary. We're going to move on to the next journalist, Alex Kosh from the Maple. Alex, are you there?
Hello?
Hello? Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi. This is a question for Professor Sachs. To your point, or to your plea for Canada to see reason and to push for negotiations and diplomacy, my question is, do you think that even if Canada wanted to do that, that it would make an impression on the United States and NATO more generally? Does Canada have the clout to actually make a difference on this issue?
Canada, together with other countries, certainly could help the United States to see reality. So if Canada and France, who I know looks askance at this, but dares not say so many times, though once in a while Macron lets something out, Germany, India, Brazil, China, everybody knows that this is a disaster, but nobody tells the US. And actually a European prime minister said to me a year ago, I said, why don't you say something? And he said, because they treat us like children. A prime minister of a major European country said that to me. It still makes my skin crawl. I don't know why they allow themselves to be treated like children. The United States is not all powerful. It can't put one foot ahead of the next one these days. So there's actually no reason but to say, you know, this isn't working so well. We actually need to think through this before the world gets blown up. And there is no strategy on this because Ukraine could lose on the battlefield, and if it wins, it gets destroyed. This is, and all we're told, the only thing we're told, Biden had 1 minute of honesty a year ago. He said, we're on a path to Armageddon. All the newspapers immediately rose up in unison and said, don't talk like that. Don't ever say that again. We're not allowed to say that. It's unbelievable. So yes, Canada can make a difference, but not by itself. But the fact of the matter is a lot of leaders know this, but one by one, they're scared.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Alex, did you have a follow-up or?
Yeah, kind of related to that. I mean, obviously this conflict has resulted in new members of NATO being added. So in the short term, it looks like, you know, NATO is stronger in a sense as a result of this war. But in the long term, do you think this war will actually weaken NATO's standing in the international community, or will it continue to grow, in your opinion?
Well, the most important thing is to define the international community. The international community is the US, Canada, Britain, the European Union, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. Those are the countries that are aligned with the US. The rest of the world is nowhere near this. The attitude of the rest of the world is, holy shit, what are you guys doing? And you're killing us in the interim because we actually have a lot of hungry people. We have a lot of problems. You've disrupted the whole world economy. And so remember that it's 20% of the world is the international community, according to the United States. And then they can't understand, oh, how could Lula say this? How could Lula go to China? How could the Saudis say this? They don't understand anything about the world that I live in, which is the other 80% of the world. Watching this, the other 80% of the world ain't impressed, believe me. And they're not standing up and rooting for the United States. And what we consider the world, or sometimes called the West, which is a term I hate for basically because it's such a bad term to describe this, but it is essentially the North Atlantic countries that have been the dominant countries for the last 2 centuries, plus the honorary members, Japan and Korea, and the Anglo-Saxon offshoots, so-called, of Australia and New Zealand. That's it. And they don't understand that the rest of the world actually has other concerns and doesn't want to back a NATO expansion war and doesn't want to live under the threat of nuclear annihilation because of the unwillingness of Ottawa and Washington to negotiate over NATO enlargement.
Thank you. So we're at the top of the hour now. I'm going to try and squeeze in. We have one last journalist, Aidan from the Canada Files. Are you there? We'll have to be a little bit brief as we've come pretty much to the end of our time. But Aidan, please do ask your question.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Aidan Jonah, Editor-in-Chief of Canada Files. So I have a question for Mr. Sachs. So the Canada Files recently, we interviewed Dimitri Lascaris, who is on a fact-finding trip to Russia, and also Canadian Tamara Lawrence also went on a fact-finding trip to Russia a few months before that. What are your thoughts on the value of fact-finding trips to Russia and understanding their perspective with this conflict?
As a general matter, I'm in favor of all possible discussion and outreach of various kinds, whether it's academics or cultural or sports. I don't want to see Russia boycotted in the Olympics. I find all of this idea of dividing the world to be extraordinarily dangerous, and the idea that we don't talk to our counterparts to be extraordinarily dangerous. For me, fact-finding is fine and good. In fact, not just fine, but Biden picking up the phone and speaking with President Putin wouldn't be bad. Even if they didn't agree, talk. Have a Zoom together. Hear each other's points of view. But that would require the maturity of maybe a 17-year-old. I don't know. But these are kids. These are children, the way they behave. And it's all bullying, shouting, taunting, humiliating, not talking. So this is incredible. When did Prime Minister Trudeau last speak to President Putin? And why not? Canada's got big stakes in this. Is it just we repeat whatever propaganda we want, or do we talk to each other? Hear the ideas. That is my biggest recommendation of all. Talk.